Welcome back to the Lens and Legacy movie podcast, where we analyze the political and social impacts of various influential films. Today, I am joined by
Jackson Canales.
Tommy Lottie.
And Nolan Huang.
Today we will be diving into the movies Apocalypse Now and Do the Right Thing, movies from the 70s and 80s that showcase a variety of topics that we wish to discuss and explore. So to begin, regarding Apocalypse Now, what does the journey up the river say about the mindset of soldiers and the chaos of the war?
Yeah, so the journey upriver it's a psychedelic journey and kind of a psychological trip throughout the whole thing as the characters slowly lose their grip on reality, and as they get closer to their mission, they start to come to terms with the journey and the trauma that they faced. And the whole movie itself, the way it's paced and shot and the acting just reflects the chaos of Vietnam and the absurdity of what was going on in the war. And the movie reflects the both the societal impacts and the impacts of the conflict in general.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of symbolism in this movie, and as we kind of move into the latter half of the film, we kind of see that there's a line blurring between civilization and, I guess, the brutality of war. So I think as we look at some of the characters, specifically Kurtz, are we supposed to see Kurtz as someone who's insane or someone who's enlightened or something in between, perhaps?
Kurtz is a fascinating character because he toes this line of insanity and enlightenment it's very opaque as to what is really going on inside his mind, and that's reflected in Brando's performance as Kurtz. But when he discusses the inoculation of the children of the village and how they would cut their arms off after they were inoculated from disease, he has a certain level of respect, but also condescension towards these people, and how his thought process is extremely nuanced, and he reflects the opacity of reality and how reality and fiction have blended into one as they've gone on this journey. And I think they reach Kurtz, and he's kind of the epitome of the journey and what reality really means.
Something that I was looking at, I've been kind of looking at throughout all these films, is the relationship between reviews and success in the box office. It kind of goes along with the same amount of, there's like a strong linear correlation between the two, obviously. As for this movie, there was a budget of about $50 million. And in the box office, they made $120 million. So they made about 240% of the original cost it took to make it. And you can kind of see that same relationship with a lot of other movies.
An interesting thing about the production of this movie, too, is how the director of the movie, Francis Ford Coppola, was quoted as describing the movie not as a movie about Vietnam, but the movie was Vietnam. And it really reflects the arduous production that this film went on. They ran into numerous issues filming. Lead star Martin Sheen had a near-fatal heart attack, a mental breakdown, and Marlon Brando showed up overweight. And in the end, Coppola had to go through millions of feet of film in post, and it took him 2 years to complete the editing of this movie. And just the complete hodgepodge of issues that plagued this production reflect that the bloated budget and the success it was still able to have shows the power and impact of this film.
Something I would add, kind of to add on to both what Jackson and Tommy said, is that the success that the movie saw was not just right away in the box office, but in the long term, as it kind of doubled its budget, which shows that a movie that, has certain themes or brings up certain topics may lead to long-term success over time rather than Yeah, rather than just initially.
For sure, and this is also seen in the critical and the responses by people to this day who watch this movie as an average viewer. In terms of Rotten Tomatoes, to this day, it has a score of around 90% as a critic score. And it can also be seen up to 94% on other websites, which means not that it's a 94 out of 100, almost a perfect movie. It means that 94% of viewers agreed that this was a good movie and gave it a positive review, which shows the consistency and why to this day people are still watching this, and the grossing amount of money they've made is still increasing to this day. In terms of regular viewers like us, we as a group gave it around a 4.5 as a rating, which is definitely on the higher end of what we've given throughout these films. And this is also seen as a 4.4 on Letterboxd, which we've been using to contrast ours and the Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, all good points about the film, and I think the film did something more than just provide maybe a synopsis of the conflict in Vietnam, but also the film is making commentary on war in general. And I don't know, I think it's an interesting question of interpretation whether or not the film's critiquing war, or if it's looking at Vietnam as something that was generally negative, or as something that the U.S. had in terms of like a power struggle. So I think in general, what do you think the commentary that we could take away from this movie is, specifically on Vietnam?
Well, I think it's always a thin line as time goes on to see whether in the moment they were glorifying something such as war or if they were critiquing it. I feel like it's easy as years go by, because it's such an iconic movie, to glorify this and romanticize this war because we weren't alive during it and we didn't get to see all the negative impacts in day-to-day life. But I feel like if you put yourself in the shoes of people who are watching this movie back then, it's definitely a lot more critical, in my opinion. I feel like as you see the characters kind of delve into questionable, it's definitely questionable whether the main character is going insane. So I think that today you can definitely see that a lot of people might try to romanticize the movie and the war, but I don't think that was Coppola's goal in the moment, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. The movie critiques the general psyche of a soldier in a conflict, especially one surreal like Vietnam, where the goals of why America was there were very misunderstood, and the soldiers really didn't feel like they deserved to be there, and they didn't feel like they should be there. And I think the fact of the matter is that the movie critiques the effect of war on the mind of the soldier and the negative psychological effects that it has on all that are involved, not just the soldiers, but the people. And you see that through Kurt's and Willard's character throughout the film.
It's really interesting looking at the war overall versus the perspective of individuals who are forced to fight in the war, because obviously soldiers are venerated as heroes because they put their life on the line for the success of the mission, but perhaps the mission overall was looked at as something that that was negative or destructive from a worldview. I think we could talk about the production of the film more specifically. How does the use of different images throughout the film, or maybe choices in costume design or effects, or maybe the storytelling in general, have an impact on the way the story is told and delivered to audiences?
There's many moments throughout the film where there's just stuff that feels completely out of place. For example, the scene when they take acid and go into the jungle, and one of the soldiers sees a panther or a jungle, but it's never really shown on screen what he saw. And there's scenes with the Playboy bunnies and the iconic one with Willard coming up through the mud and looking for Kurtz. And there's a lot of scenery throughout the movie that just doesn't really make sense or fit into what's happening. So I think there's a general atmosphere of questioning of what is real and what's actually going on. And I think all of the scenery throughout the movie really amplifies that ambiguity that you are meant to see throughout the movie.
Yeah, it's definitely a film that's making a lot of comments on a lot of important issues, and I think over time we'll start to see maybe different perspectives as maybe another conflict similar to Vietnam arises in the near future. Maybe the way that the film is interpreted is completely different. And moving on to our next film, we're moving away from foreign conflict more to domestic one, with the idea of race being at the forefront of Do the Right Thing, a Spike Lee movie that has had a pretty lasting impact. But I guess race is obviously at the forefront of this movie. But what is the movie saying about race and identity, as well as community and interracial relations as a whole?
Well, I think it really goes back to the name of the movie. Everyone's trying to do the right thing, and I think no one knows to this day what is the right thing. I think what I took away from this movie is trying to see things through everyone's point of view, whether it's race, age, socioeconomic. All these people are kind of just trying to make their way in such a small. You go from Apocalypse Now and this like grand set in all these different places to literally just a neighborhood block, and the issues kind of seem just as important. You're invested in these normal people and how they interact with each other, and I think it was trying to point out that I think it's important coming from a black man, a black director, being critical of everyone. This didn't feel like it was pushing one agenda, pushing one thing. It felt like you could see how everyone was feeling, and you really felt for all the characters. At least I did. So I thought that it was more of a push towards equality in the sense that everybody's struggling and everyone has their own issues.
Yeah. Adding on to what Jackson was saying, the idea of putting yourself in everyone else's shoes kind of shows you, like, as you're looking at like the shop owner, the community, you're looking at like they're looking out for their best interest and their community's best interest, and it brings the question: is there a definition of the right thing? And it's hard to really take a side in this movie. You're not really either with the community or with the Sal's pizza owner. It's more about what is the right thing, and if there even is one single right action.
That's a very good point. I think that it's interesting because there is some sort of a comedic irony to the title of the movie, where there isn't really a right thing to do, and you don't really know how you're supposed to feel, and maybe you could, like Nolan said, put yourself in the shoes of other characters, and you have a different perspective depending on the way you look at a lot of the situations. Spike Lee definitely uses a lot of imagery and a lot of elements of film to create a sense of pressure. When you start out in the movie, it just does seem like a pretty calm day, a day that's heating up, and as the day gets warmer and warmer, as you get to the middle of the day, you can feel tensions and pressures rising. And I think that is a very intelligent, artistic direction, which shows the way that the film is experiencing a sense of maybe rising pressures in terms of race or tensions between racial groups as the heat itself within the weather of the film changes. Any thoughts on that?
It's a really interestingly paced movie, especially with the backdrop of heat, color, and all of that, because the movie it's quite slow for a large portion of it. There's really great dialogue and shots, but the movie really crescendos in a grand fashion with the burning down of Sal's Pizza and the riot and the death of Radio Raheem. And the movie just is able to create this sense of pressure so perfectly, where you really feel it just building. And there's almost a moment when it's nighttime and it starts to cool off, you almost feel like that nothing can happen, the movie's going to end, and then everything just explodes. And it's a really brilliant depiction of these things by Spike Lee, and how seemingly one day, one small thing, these things can mount and create these massive conflicts over time.
Something I thought was interesting was the character, the mayor, and how, as the story progressed, I mean, at the beginning he's depicted as kind of the little town loony, everyone kind of makes fun of him a little bit on the street. But as the tensions kind of get higher and it's boiling, he seems to be the only person who's rational, and wants to settle the tensions. And I thought that was interesting because I wasn't expecting him, of all people, to be the voice of reason. And I guess that makes sense why no one was listening to him, but it was a little bit frustrating, as it's easy to say as a viewer that you would have reacted in one way or that people overreacted. But I thought he was a good a good character to contrast with what you'd think he'd do. I thought it was a good subversion of expectations.
Yeah, there's definitely quite a few interesting characters, and they all kind of have this different thing that they're looking for. Like, obviously, Radio Raheem and his friend are looking for the Sal's Pizza owner to put up some black men on his wall of fame, but that kind of becomes a symbolic maybe idea of even if racial groups get along, there is this sense of like individualism, and there is a sense of difference within the community, even though they all live together. The black men and the Italian men and the Hispanic women all have this like different vibe and this different culture, and all the scenes are completely distinct. I think that's very interesting because maybe the film is suggesting something about us being more similar than we are, but still separated by these constructs.
And it's also important, I think, that we talk about the way Spike Lee uses stereotypes in this movie for all races. And I think it's a direct artistic commentary on the absurdity of these stereotypes and how that it's so hard to look past each other's differences when there are these stereotypes in place. And it's such this massive wall of difference that is in some scenes insurmountable. And I think that's reflected by this movie. And I think if the conversations in this movie are written in a way where you really, can feel for both sides of whoever's in the conversation. And I think it's a question of whether they're really talking to each other or if they're just talking past each other. And I think that is, where this movie excels compared to many other movies on the same topic.
I think it's really interesting too, the kind of the final scene, maybe as one of the final points that we make in this discussion, is that Mookie is the one to start the riot and kind of throw that trash can into Sal's Pizza, and that's like I don't know, the straw that broke the camel's back, basically, in terms of the riot. And it's really interesting because that is like completely contrasted by Sal and Mookie's relationship throughout the film up until that point, where Sal thinks of himself as kind of a father figure to Mookie, and Mookie looks up to Sal as someone similar to a father figure. So I think it's interesting that when it came to the end of the film, Mookie didn't really look to their relationship and rather sided with his race more so as an identifiable group than perhaps someone who's like more adjacent to his family. So I thought it was interesting, maybe that there's a shared history that black people have or Italian immigrants have, that even if you get as close as you possibly can to someone, even if you consider them a father figure, maybe you can never truly be someone who you're not, based on this. Maybe that's a commentary that the movie's making, or maybe the movie's critiquing that idea. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, Spike is, I would say this is probably his best film just because of, like Ash mentioned, this critique that he has, but it's also just a very accurate commentary. I mean, you look at things 36 years later and how much has really changed in discourse around racial tension and stereotypes and racism in general. And I think there's a lot of hidden symbolism that Spike Lee adds in the movie about ways to affect this change and effectively make things better. But I think he also comments how easy it is to fall into anger and stereotypes, and it doesn't really solve anything. It just makes things worse. And having positive conversations about these issues is really what's going to make a difference in the long run.
And honestly, I think it's important who ended up getting into the conflict at Sal's Pizzeria, being Radio Raheem and Sal, two characters I really liked throughout the entire movie. I thought were some of the most reasonable people. Didn't really look for a lot of conflict. Were looking to cool the tensions around them most of the time. But even they, of all people, got pushed to the limit. And I think that kind of shows that you can't really look at the end result. You can't look at the riot. You can't look at the fight. You can't look at a dead man and then think you know everything that happened, you know? There were so many other factors that led up to it, and I think that it's scary how this happens in the real world, and you never really know how it led up to that point. So I thought that it was a good movie.
Yeah, just to close out the discussion, maybe we can touch on the comparison that we make in our main question about whether box office success is correlating with is positively correlated with budgets for films. I think this film kind of shows that you don't need this massive production to really have a successful film that has a lasting impact and makes a really strong positive commentary. The entirety of this film takes place in one day on one block with barely any ridiculous elements of film beyond simple costume design and maybe some advanced level of graphic generated imaging. But maybe we can look at something like the finances for the film.
Yeah. Nolan, do you want to do that real quick?
Yeah. So the budget on
Wait, I got the number.
all right. Wait. All right. Yeah.
So the budget was around $6.5 million for Do the Right Thing, and it made a whopping 570% of its production costs, which is about $37.3 million worldwide at the box office, which kind of just adds to this growing relation between you do well in the box office, that you're probably going to have you'll probably have a movie that's received well from not just the public, not just the critics, but really everyone. I mean, I know it's simple and you'd think that, but
It's also really interesting to note. I mean, this is a pretty low budget film at only $6 million. And I think that goes to show that the money doesn't necessarily mean the movie's going to be good. And I think a lot of it relies on who's directing it, who's acting in it. And I think a lot of the performances and the direction of the movie really just amplifies and reflects Spike Lee's skill as a director.
All right. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch you in the next podcast. Thank you.